Hello, everybody. My name's Paul, and I'm here for the Comics Cube with my pals Duy and LaMar. And today we're going to be talking about Geoff Johns and Gary Frank's Doomsday Clock, the controversial sequel to Watchmen.
Which is different from the controversial prequel to Watchmen.
Yes. Anything to do with Watchmen is pretty much controversial.
There's
Yeah.
another sequel to Watchmen that is not as controversial.
That is true, actually. It's not even the only sequel. That's crazy. So the reason this one's so controversial is like with everything else that's spun off from Watchmen, it doesn't have the approval of the co-creator Alan Moore, and I don't think Dave Gibbons, the other co-creator, was that bothered about it either. I just looked it up and he said, I won't be reading it when he was asked about it at the time, which is fair enough, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Can't fault him there. But I must admit that I do enjoy it myself, as flawed as it is. And we will be discussing, the flaws and the good points of Doomsday Clock today. So I'm going to start off by asking Duy and LaMar. Let's start with Duy. What did you think when when DC announced they were doing this comic?
Well, when it came to Watchmen, the seal had already been broken, right? Because of before Watchmen. So I said, all right, I guess this was inevitable. But I saw the creative team, Geoff Johns and Gary Frank, and I saw that it was Superman was pretty heavily going to be in it. And that's pretty much a combination that gets my money regardless. I will say that combination of Geoff Johns, Gary Frank, and Superman is my favorite part of the entire series. LaMar,
Yeah.
you're on mute.
Mute then. There we go. Okay, I guess if I'm gonna say something, you want to hear me, right? Okay, so um, for me, I didn't really know what to expect, but like you, I was like, Gary Frank is doing Superman. So, and there's some Watchmen stuff. So I was like, I could see that working out. So I kind of went into it with a blank slate. Like I didn't have any expectations either way. The only thing I really expected is that it would not come out on schedule. That's the only thing I expected, right? Other than that, I'm cool. So when I finally got around to reading it, I was like, well, yeah, I'm getting what I imagined I would get. In regards to both the Gary Frank Superman stuff and the book not coming out on time. Yeah.
Gary Frank is one of my favorite artists. So at the very, very least, I thought I'll get a bunch of pages where Gary Frank draws Watchmen characters. That's pretty cool.
And it was pretty cool, to be fair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The interesting thing about this comic is that
Wait, Paul,
DC.
Paul, what did you think?
Oh well, no, I'm getting to that. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no. The interesting thing about this comic is that it was tied to everything else. Well, they tried to tie it to everything else that was going on in the DC universe at the time. They did a big event called Rebirth, which kind of brought out the best aspects, or what was supposed to be the best aspects of what came before the New 52 revamp, and the best aspects of the New 52 revamp, and kind of merged them together. And Geoff Johns and Gary Frank were kind of part of that build-up. Geoff Johns wrote a DC Rebirth special, which brought back Wally West, the missing Flash, the version of the Flash that had been missing from the New 52, and sort of acknowledged for the first time that all this continuity happened before the New 52. So it was very, very exciting, but I couldn't help but think at the time, because like you say, LaMar, there was no way this was going to come out in time. And you've put all your eggs here, DC, into the Doomsday Clock basket. Is this wise to tie it so closely. And sure enough, they started dropping hints. Some blue energy that could be Dr. Manhattan started turning up in random DC titles, and they were making references to this larger mystery. And I couldn't help but think, there's no way this is going to pay off, because this is not going to come out on time. And sure enough, the
Did not.
prophecy was fulfilled. It didn't come out on time. But nevertheless, like you do, I saw Geoff Johns, Gary Frank, Superman. That was a sell for me. I mean, that cover they released with Superman kind of spread out like Leonardo da Vinci's cloak. I can't remember what it's called, that picture.
The Vitruvian Man.
But yeah, that's it. Like him.
Is it?
And with all Dr. Manhattan's face behind him and all like the clockwork coming off, and I thought that looks so cool. And so I was sold. I wasn't really bothered about it, but I wasn't really thinking about it as a Watchmen sequel.
No,
because that story's done. We did that. If anything doesn't need a prequel, creatively speaking, if anything doesn't need a prequel or a sequel, it's Watchmen. That story was told. Everything you need to know about those characters you got in those 12 issues. But, the chance to see Superman going up against Dr. Manhattan and, not as a character from Watchmen, but as this godlike force, that was really tempting, I think.
The idea of Batman and Lex pitting themselves against somebody who might be smarter than them.
Exactly, yeah. It wasn't like, Adrian as, or Ozymandias as, Ozymandias from Watchmen. It was like the smartest man from one universe pitting himself against the smartest men from the DC universe. And that's tempting.
It sounds to me like, Paul, that the best way to look at it from a Watchmen perspective is this is an alternate possible future of Watchmen.
It is the only way to look at it.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead, and I hate saying this because to me this is mostly bullshit. It's a bullshit complaint when people say it most of the time, but I will go ahead and say this. Geoff Johns was clearly a fan of Watchmen, and here he is writing fiction about it.
I mean, this is it. It's Watchmen fan fiction, isn't it? I mean, I know that seems to be quite dismissive of a comic that I really enjoyed, but in terms of Watchmen, there's no other way of looking at it, is it? But Watchmen fan fiction by a big fan of Watchmen.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
No. Oh, I was just going to say that, if anybody who reads fan fiction, because, like when you're talking about people who read comics, fan fiction, there's like it's almost like a subgenre of comics at this point because it's so developed. And, people go so far as to like publish online their fan fiction as best as they're able to. But, some of those stories are really good,
That's why I said I hate it when people use it, but
yeah. A lot of that
in this case.
Yeah, it's kind of like somebody like referring to you as a geek. Like to them it's an insult, but to you it's not. It's like, of course, man, I've been doing this for 40 years. I mean, I'm good at it now, right? So it's not the insult you think it is, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So we seem to have been like focusing on how it doesn't work as a Watchmen sequel to start off with. Were there any other factors, do you think, that made it not work as a Watchmen sequel, LaMar?
I think the biggest, and the one that's the most immediate is that in the Watchmen universe, there was only one guy with powers, right? So when the moment you introduce one more person with powers, it changes the dynamic of the whole universe, right? And then it's written and joined with the DC universe, right? There's no shortage of high-powered people in DC, right? That's like one of the biggest things that people are like, oh, I don't like DC, the characters are overpowered, right? But it's funny because these people love Watchmen and they don't consider Dr. Manhattan to be overpowered at all. It's just, this is just really bad logic. But, you don't just introduce one guy, like you didn't just introduce Superman, for example. You brought everybody, right? So the dynamic of the Watchmen universe changes with as far as it going in the other direction, not so much, right? Because, and I think that was kind of the point that Geoff Johns was trying to get across, because obviously the way the story's told, we'll get into that later, of course, but there's a reason for that. So I'll revisit that sentiment. But yeah, I think that's like the most obvious one to me, you know?
Yeah, I agree. Like, you've got like Dr. Manhattan's the only superpowered person in the Watchmen universe. And then all of a sudden, Dr. Manhattan's the only superpowered person in the Watchmen universe. And this dude with invisible guns.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
Yeah.
I read that as they're real guns. The guns just happen to be invisible. That's how I read it.
Yeah. But again, it does seem to be this sort of like it does seem to be breaking the rules of the Watchmen universe somewhat, doesn't it? Like, and I know these rules are quite loose. This is a universe where someone was able to create a giant psychic squid, and drop it on a city.
But this is compared to the DC universe. This is a universe that has a lot of rules.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that doesn't really work for me about it was Dr. Manhattan in the Watchmen universe. He had this attitude. It's very different. It's subtle, but it's very different. He had this attitude in Watchmen where it's like nothing is going to change. He can't change anything. He's fated to do what he's going to do. But then throughout Doomsday Clock, he says things like, "Oh, I choose to tell you this now," or whatever. He says like things are like, he says something to Adrian where he says something like, "Tell him, Adrian, or I will." But Watchmen, Dr. Manhattan would have just said, "In 5 seconds, I will tell him."
Yeah.
Or in 5 seconds, you will tell him. He knows who's going to tell him. So that's weird to me. The other thing to me that doesn't work, that in terms of this being a Watchmen sequel, is Watchmen, when you read it, has a commentary on both comics as a medium, superhero comics as a genre, and society in 1985, which somehow is still relevant today, which is sad. Okay. This has commentary on DC, on the history of DC Comics. Primarily, that's it. And it tries very badly to have commentary on the state of today.
Oh God, yes.
It does not succeed on that front.
Oh yeah, it's very much a sort of like, oh, look at these people on the left. They're just as bad as the people on the right. It's like, are they though?
Are they? There's a lot of stuff where they said like, in the last 2 issues where Rorschach says, "Oh, this universe is on the brink of digital warfare." It's like, where? Like, what? Who's fighting? Like, are you referring to people fighting online? Because I don't see it.
Well, this is the thing as well. The Watchmen universe is still in the 90s, isn't it?
This is set in 2016.
You've got this fictional universe that did resemble ours, sort of, but then got irreversibly changed, and by a giant squid dropping on Manhattan. And so it doesn't really Robert Redford's president, it doesn't really resemble our, because I don't know what he's trying to say with that, Robert Redford being president, but I don't know much about Redford, but I mean,
Doesn't
he's no
say
Trump
anything.
and he's no Biden, whatever,
Yeah.
point he's trying to make, like,
It doesn't say anything. It's just that was the implication at the end of Watchmen.
Yeah. So that's meaningless, essentially, like. And so, yeah, you've got this fictional world that doesn't resemble our world now, doesn't resemble our world in the 90s. It's set in the 90s. There's, some kind of really trite thing about, oh, both sides are just as bad. And I think politically there are a lot of critiques you can make of the left, but just to make this really reductive sort of like, oh, woke people are just as bad as right-wing people. I mean, it's childish, It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, considering you're using Watchmen characters to make this point, I mean, it's not good. And then, of course, the DC universe, as much as I love it, it doesn't resemble our world much at all, really, does it? Like, I mean, you slap Putin in there, but it still doesn't resemble our world that much,
Trump is in it.
Yeah, but they still, they showed Putin, but they didn't show Trump. I
Yeah.
mean, it's obviously Trump, but, they were still too cowardly to show Trump, a proper caricature of Trump. Like,
I agree with that. Yeah. Like, it's
Yeah.
weird because using Nixon in Watchmen felt a little timeless because
Yeah.
Nixon wasn't the president when Watchmen was made. But
Yeah.
this one was like, I was rereading this today and I was like, oh, well, that aged badly.
Yeah. So yeah, yeah, absolutely right there. As a commentary, in the same way that Watchmen was a commentary on the 80s, the West in the 80s, it fails. The West in the 20th century, really, I guess. But this fails to reflect the West in the 21st century. I mean, would you agree with that, LaMar?
Yeah, I think that because you can kind of see what it's going for, but it doesn't quite get there. And I think the reason why it doesn't quite get there is because there was some other stuff that they were trying to accomplish with the story. Because, like, events, and obviously this is a DC Comics event. It's not necessarily like a Watchmen event or a Green Lantern event or whatever. There's usually reasons for them that have nothing to do with the stories themselves a lot of the times. It's because they're trying to consolidate something, or they're trying to expand something, or they feel like we have to reset everything, for whatever reason. So while they're trying to make these statements, it's happening with that kind of stuff. And Watchmen didn't have that because it was a story that you really could drop this story in like anybody could have published Watchmen. Like, if, let's say, it didn't come out in the 80s, let's say it came out, in next year, like Alan Moore and David Gibbons could crowdfund it, and the story it would still be the story. Like, it doesn't have those constraints because it's the story, so sometimes when you have those types of things and you're trying to tell this story, that stuff gets in the way because you already have these mandates here. So it's like, okay, you have this list of things and these are the things we have to do, right? Whereas you don't have that. You don't, when you're trying to make these overreaching things, and then you have to do it with these constraints, so it's a tightrope walk, and it's not easy, especially when you have all these like lofty things that you're trying to do, right? And if you're trying to make these grand political statements and stuff, sometimes that stuff can get lost, and I think that that's kind of what happened here. Even though you can clearly see what they were trying to do, I just don't think that, because of how the consequences of the story, as we see when we get to the end, those kind of consequences don't necessarily facilitate that kind of storytelling.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would call both sides are equally bad a grand political statement. But I see where you're getting at.
You see what I'm getting at. Yeah, I wasn't talking about that specifically. Let me just go on record and say this. That's absolutely asinine to me. Okay.
It should be asinine to any logical human being.
You could, looking at the left and the right, you could make a story there. You could make a point there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be a point I agree with, but I think there's a way of making that point in a mature way that this comic doesn't. Like, it's like, look, they're angry and it's accomplishing nothing. Like you say, that's asinine, So we've talked thematically about how it doesn't work as a Watchmen sequel. Were there any particular specific story beats that didn't work for you, that made it didn't work as not work as a story, or not work as a Watchmen sequel? So LaMar.
I think the major one I already said about just the introduction of the DC Comics characters, like almost immediately it breaks the whole universe, you know, and because of the simple fact that Watchmen was trying to communicate a special thing, and when you introduce these other characters, um, the way that they did, you're gonna have problems with that kind of stuff. But also the thing, and I understand that this is was a consequence, right, of just something that evolved. So, but I'm just saying it, like you have the New 52 in a lot of ways was basically intended to be the Watchmen universe in regards to tone and how they handle the take on superheroes. But now it's just you have people with powers, right? And so all of these things that we see like about superheroes they're not supposed to be happy. Everybody has to be angsty and things like that. And a superhero being a superhero just because they think it's a good thing to do. That's not realistic. So, and all of these other kinds of things. And so, a lot of that was in the Watchmen story, but a lot of that was also Alan Moore saying this is absolutely ridiculous, right? So I think that it's one of those stories. Watchmen ultimately is a story that people took the wrong lessons from, right?
I agree.
Yeah, and I think Alan Moore has pretty much said the same thing, that he was just trying to show how ridiculous a lot of this stuff is if you take it too far. But then we end up with the New 52, and obviously it didn't work. And I'm not trying to turn this into a dump fest or anything. It's just that this is what happened, right? I mean, and this story comes about the way it does because that's what happened,
It's interesting that because Doomsday Clock was pitched as a rebuttal to Watchmen in a lot of places. But Watchmen is a rebuttal to Watchmen in a way.
Yes, it is.
It's like
It rebuts itself.
yeah. So, Dave, was there anything specific for you, like any sort of characters or story beats that didn't work?
I thought structurally it was disjointed.
Hmm.
I wasn't. How do I put this? I wasn't reading a lot of DC comics at the time. Like, I was not particularly a fan of Rebirth. I thought that, I had jumped off sometime in the New 52, but I thought that the praise that Rebirth was getting was indicative of a lot of people just being happy that what they asked for was being given to them, which I'm like, I wasn't
agree.
really a fan of.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I will say this. I watched the second season of Masters of the Universe Revelation over the weekend. I'm not a fan of it. I feel like it hits a lot of the beats that you would hit if you had to make it. But like, I'm like, that's not enough for me. I gotta have it be. I gotta have it deliver in full. Like it's gotta be good. I'd rather have something that doesn't meet my expectations but is good, rather than gives me everything I asked for, and is kind of not really all that great. So that's what I was. So that's what I didn't like about Rebirth. So I had no context for this. So things like the Justice Society being missing, I had completely forgotten about that. The Legion not being around, I had completely forgotten about that. So I'm reading it and I'm like, all right, those guys aren't around here. And also, like, I just thought it was a little disjointed because Superman shows up in issue 1, doesn't show up again till much later. Dr. Manhattan doesn't show up at all until halfway through. The most egregious one is Wonder Woman showing up in like the 8th issue or something, and you can tell Geoff Johns was like, hey, Wonder Woman's not in this thing so far.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all of that stuff with all LexCorp buying out Wayne Industries or the Superman theory, the Superman conspiracy and all of that. I felt like LaMar said, it was like there were too many balls in the air, and not enough of it was given enough time.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That was it.
Like Luthor turns up, has a really cool conversation with Ozymandias, gets shot, and then you don't see him till later on, where he drops some clue to Lois Lane that doesn't go anywhere. Mm-hmm. The other thing that didn't work for me is the comedian. What's he doing in that story?
What is he doing in that story?
He's just in it because he's the comedian. Oh, and you've got to have the comedian in a Watchmen sequel. But he didn't do anything. He turns up, shoots Lex Luthor, buggers off again. And then I think he shoots the Riddler later on or something, doesn't he?
Well, he tries.
Yeah.
It's funny that you have to have the comedian in this story, but you don't need to have the Silk Spectre, Night Owl.
Well, this is it, isn't it? That they could have just left the comedian out very easily, and it would, because the comedian is such a big part of Watchmen. The comedian represents America basically in Watchmen, and then you've got him just representing I don't know what, like mustaches. I don't know.
I don't know what he's doing. I feel like Geoff. I feel like Geoff put him in for that one cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And then didn't know what to do with it for the rest of it.
So we talked a lot about what didn't work here. I think we should give a little bit more background on what the intention was with Doomsday Clock at this point. Doomsday Clock was supposed to come out every month for 12 issues for a year. And it was set a year in the future of the DC universe. And during those 12 months, the DC universe, all the other titles would catch up with Doomsday Clock. Now, that didn't happen for a number of reasons, mainly the pre-discussed delays. So we got a situation where I think Duy mentioned earlier on, the Legion and the Justice Society were supposed to come back for Doomsday Clock, but all the other writers basically got bored of waiting, and Scott Snyder ended up bringing back the Justice Society in his pages of Justice League anyway. So, and like DC just sort of like pulled the rug out from under its own event, which they all want to do on occasion.
This is a comic that absolutely should have come out on time for it to have the full impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like, I think JLA Avengers #4 was like maybe 4 or 5 months delayed. That's okay. It doesn't impact anything.
Yeah.
But this one, you cannot have the rug pulled out from under you in this one. And they did. Massively.
There are a number of things happening in Doomsday Clock as well that don't make any sense because nobody's picked up on them in other books, like the Superman theory. This whole idea that certain superheroes were created by the American government, and this is fueling the distrust the public have for superheroes. That's a really great plot point, and I think it works in the context of this story, to be fair. But no other bugger has ever picked up on it in any other book, and it was obviously meant to be something that was picked up on.
Yeah.
Bruce Wayne is facing an attempted takeover by Lex Luthor. That's never mentioned in any other book. And perhaps the most glaring one, and you can't really blame Geoff Johns for this, but Alfred's in it. And then Alfred being killed off in Batman. Because, like, Tom King, this is the background as I understand it. Tom King killed Alfred as a fake out in Batman. He was meant to be revealed as still alive, and then all the higher ups went, "Oh no, leave him dead. That'd be cool." And so poor old Alfred. It's supposed to be a year in the future, and Alfred's walking around alive with no explanation. So they very much undercut themselves.
I love it. I love it. It's so funny.
You know, honestly, for me, that adds to the readability of the book, because just knowing that stuff, it's kind of like, meta, if you want to say that, but just knowing all the stuff happens, and then the stuff behind the scenes, it's like, man, this is crazy, But then again, though, also it works because honestly, killing Alfred is just such a stupid idea. Alfred shouldn't stay dead permanently. It's just a dumb idea. Right.
Yeah,
so
I really agree with you.
Yeah, you know what I mean? That's just stupid. There's a reason why certain stuff doesn't happen in comics, and it's generally because these are bad ideas, right? So yeah.
It's also like what the fourth, fifth time Alfred has died.
Yes. Yeah. Do you think Geoff Johns was like, "Am I safe putting Alfred in this?" Yeah, no one would be stupid enough to kill off Alfred.
Yeah, one of my favorite comics now is Nightwing, and Alfred being dead is a huge part of it. But every time they mention it, I'm like, "Oh yeah, Alfred is dead." Like my brain refuses to believe it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, this is a whole separate conversation, but it's a bit like Watson being dead and Sherlock Holmes kicking around Baker Street on his own. Like,
Let's steer this back to Doomsday Clock.
Yeah, that's the nature of the beast. So we talked a little bit there about what doesn't work. And if anyone's watching this and thinking this is just three guys ragging on this comic, why did they even bother reading it? They obviously hate it. Why are they talking about it?
Did you realize that Doomsday Clock's initials are DC?
But I gotta say, even despite all that stuff I just said, I really like this comic. And so what I'd like to do now is maybe talk a little bit about what does work and why it does work. So let's start with Duy. What do you think worked about Doomsday Clock?
I do think it is very enjoyable. I do think it is very enjoyable. Gary Frank's art is off the scale. It is beautiful. I just think that it's trying to be something it's not. But as a pure piece of entertainment, I think it's quite entertaining. And all the stuff with Superman, to answer your question.
Yeah, I would agree with that. LaMar, what do you think?
I'm going to say like this, man. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And not in a way that you kind of have to, some people will read something 3 or 4 times and they'll be like, okay, it grew on me, right? I kind of knew what the issues were going to be. Like we said, we predicted that these things were going to happen. I kind of knew what those things were going to be going in. So I just looked at what was there. And there's a lot of things in this book that are just absolutely fantastic. Like Dewey was talking about Gary Frank's art. I mean, that's a sure shot every time, man. When you talk about like an event or like a 12-issue series, I mean, there's just certain benchmarks that you have, like with DC. Like, you think about like George Perez's work on Crisis, you think about, to bring it up a little bit, Ivan Reis on Blackest Night. Like Doomsday Clock is right there. Like the art doesn't slip. Like it's so much so that even though it took like 2 years for this story to come out or something similar to that, like, I'm a grown man. I got other stuff to do, right? So I'm not really worried about the delay all that much. I read it when it comes out, and then a lot of people just wait for the trade anyway. So it was worth it for him to put the time into the art that he put into it, right? Yeah. So like, I just was like, okay, cool. I can just kind of go over the other issues until the other one comes out. It's not that big of a deal. Or I can do some of the other things I have to do. So I'm not really all that worried about it. But
I've got other hobbies.
Yeah. I mean, the art is undeniable. So, I mean, it's worth it just for that alone. And then like like Dewey said, like the Superman stuff, if you look at it like as a Superman story, to me it reads better if you just look at it like a Superman story. So when I read it, that's the perspective I come from with it. And it's a story that I keep going back to, because of that, because I just view it as a Superman story, you know.
Absolutely. I completely agree. It is a phenomenal Superman story.
Mm-hmm.
And like Doy said, when it's trying to be something it isn't, it's rubbish. But when it's being what it is, a great DC Universe Superman story, it's fantastic. Because like I said earlier on, this Superman theory stuff is so great. And like Superman being what he is in the face of this mounting cynicism, it's not this grand theme that Geoff Johns is after, but it's a good theme and it's an enjoyable theme. And something that really spoke to me, to be fair to Geoff, was the contrast between Dr. Manhattan as a man of inaction and Superman as a man of action. And I absolutely love that. The idea that Dr. Manhattan is like, this stuff is inevitable. Life is this beautiful chaos that you can't possibly fight against. So you've just got to let it happen and get swept along with events, which kind of happens in Alan Moore's stories. That's Alan Moore's thing, I think, when he writes superheroes.
Yeah.
But then, Superman's this guy who's like, no, screw that. I'm going to try and affect the outcome anyway, even though it's impossible. And and this sort of chaotic, I suppose, is that the right word? I don't know. But
sure.
This kind of like. Yeah.
We know what you mean.
You know what I mean? Like this sort of like, do you say chaotic or quixotic? I don't know.
I think it's chaotic.
Yeah, I'm punching above my weight here. I'll dial it back a bit. But this idea that Superman, even if it's hopeless, the struggle is the thing, the effort is the thing, the action is the thing, and you just might defy the odds and create a different outcome anyway. And that's a really positive message. That's a really, that applies to our life, I think. You could just sit back and go, oh, what's the point? There's nothing I can do. Or you can try anyway, and you never know, you just might make a difference. And I think that's a really lovely message. And that's kind of what Superman's all about in many ways, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So in that small way, it does kind of work as a rebuttal to cynicism around superheroes. Not so much as a rebuttal to Watchmen, because like we said earlier, Watchmen already kind of rebuts that. But as a rebuttal against cynicism, I think it's good. And the other thing I like
isn't like one of the key points of Watchmen that Dr. Manhattan changes his mind?
Well, this is it. Yeah. He kind of does that anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. No, you're right. The other thing is that the key message of this, another key message of Doomsday Clock, is that DC continuity doesn't matter. DC continuity will keep changing, and that's okay, because it's all kind of beautiful and fun anyway, and it all revolves around Superman. And again, that's such a sort of self-indulgent, insular message for DC to be doing with characters like the characters of Watchmen. But in a way, it's kind of genius, because loads of people are going to buy this who don't normally bother with DC, right? And a big complaint, I think, kind of people who are kind of on the verge of getting into DC, but they're not quite sure how to do it. One of the big complaints they have is like, oh, the continuity is all confused, So Doomsday Clock is likely to be something they check out because it's an event, it's a sequel to Watchmen. And the message to this is that, continuity doesn't matter that much, just have fun.
Yeah.
So that's kind of genius in a way, isn't it?
Which they're pretty good at right now. Like they're much less strict on continuity now.
Yeah. Which is brilliant, and as a sort of statement of intent as well. I mean, I don't think it was Didio's intent at the time, Dan Didio, but it's certainly the people who've come after him. It's certainly their intent. Let's not worry about it. Let's just have fun with it. That's kind of what Doomsday Clock is saying, and that's kind of what DC are doing now.
Yeah, they kind of have to, because honestly, DC works better in that kind of format.
Yeah.
It's like the stuff that, like when you hit, because we all kind of have our own headcanon anyway. So it's like, that was a crazy idea. I'm just going to disregard that. And then, this was great. So yeah, this is actually still in play. Just being able to do that, it gives creators also that come on books, it gives them more of a freedom to kind of foster ideas and to kick them around a little bit. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You just never reference it again.
Yeah.
So that's been going on since the 30s. So even though stories were told more in like a single issue, but hey, if something happened in a whole issue and there was a whole story, and it's like, well, just don't read it again. It's not that big of a deal. So now that they're kind of embracing that, but the characters understand that they're in the same universe together, which is good, because that allows for even more story potential. But you don't have to be reading 50 books to try to understand what's happening. And that works best for the reader too, because you may only be interested in one book, but you buy it faithfully every week. Those are the kind of customers you want, instead of just having a few people that buy everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
absolutely.
only continuity that matters is the one in the story that you're reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Yep.
And that is what, that's the ending to Doomsday Clock. That's what it's saying. It's like, this has changed, and it's gonna keep changing, and you can't be like Dr. Manhattan and be like, oh, why is this happening? Why is it doing this? Because it's gonna keep happening whether you like it or not. So just enjoy the ride,
I will say though, this is 100% me being cynical, but you get to the point where, Earth 1 becomes Earth 1985. It's still unexplored even today. And in 10 years ago, I would have been like, oh, cool, pre-crisis Earth is still around, and I want to get to that. Except I get to that at my age now, and I go, I can't wait for DC to do absolutely nothing with this.
I mean, DC kind of do this, don't they? Like, anything could happen, but it probably won't.
Nah, yeah, like that. I mean, honestly, just within the context of the story, like the two beats you were talking about, Bruce Wayne having to fight off a LexCorp takeover. And like, you could write a mini series for this event just based around that. Or like what you were saying about the Superman theory, with the because we know that people, I'm not going to mention any of these people's names, but we have certain people who are conspiracy nuts, and they get a lot of traction and they have a lot of sway because of things like YouTube and other forms of social media now. And those people are all over the place. And so like a book dedicated to those kind of people, where you have these things kind of like playing out and people kind of looking, that kind of stuff would be dope. If I kind of wish I think they missed an opportunity with that, because if you're going to do a big event like that, you have all of these things going on, these subplots, you don't have to, really deal with them in the story. You have room to deal with them outside of the story and just say, hey, this is a tie-in for those of y'all who are interested in this,
But let's think about the tie-in they did do, which was The Button, which was a story in Tom King's Batman and Joshua Williamson's Flash.
Yeah.
It was basically just, Batman and the Flash with, the comedian's badge. Go, what's this all about? I don't know. and then Reverse Flash turns up.
Inconsequential, isn't it? It's inconsequential.
Yeah, really inconsequential. It's like Reverse Flash turns up, and then Dr. Manhattan kills him, and then Jay turns up and buggers off again. And that's kind of it. And they're like, oh, who's Jay? He's a bit familiar there. And yeah, that's it. it's rubbish. So yeah, you're right. And they could have done so much. They could have had a whole Firestorm spin-off, tying into the Superman theory, which would have been amazing. You could have had Metamorpho popping up in it, it's... And what we saw none of that. Like you said, you could have had a Lex and Bruce spin-off. Like,
first of all, I will say this: Firestorm, low-key, is one of the most underrated, greatest superheroes to ever exist.
I agree.
Yeah.
And the fact that they have done nothing proper with them, because he's a multiple people in one body person since like 1987 or whatever it was. Look, Firestorm was so big, they put him in the Super Friends within like 2 years of his debut.
Yeah.
The fact that they have done nothing with Firestorm since is a crime against nature.
And they keep setting up these promising status quos for a Firestorm, of which the Superman theory is the latest, you know. So originally Firestorm's like this well-meaning but fairly dumb jock kid gets merged with this like really nerdy, dorky scientist guy into a superhero. That's a really cool premise, you know, and they ran with that for a few years.
Yeah, it's
And
the
then,
anti-Spider-Man. Like it's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
anti-Spider-Man
Mhm.
archetype.
And then and then like he was kind of revamped. So what was the name of that character? Jason Rush, was it?
Jason Rush,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
you've got Ronnie, who's a jock, merged with Jason Rush, who's a nerd. You know, and one's a white guy, one's a black guy. You know, and they're kind of merging together. I mean, there's a lot of potential in that, which they never explored.
Well, see, I don't think that works as well because what the fuck is Ronnie gonna do as a disembodied head? He's an idiot. Like,
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
this is.
what advice is he gonna give?
I mean, that's an
Mhm.
example of how they failed to exploit that, didn't they? You
Yeah.
know, to its full
Mhm.
potential. Like, you know. Yeah, I mean, they're merging like a really intelligent black kid with like a jock white kid. They've merged them together, and they make the jock white kid the science guy. Then, like, you know, it's but now you've got like Ronnie as this really sort of good-hearted but dumb kid, and Martin Stein. Geoff Johns has established now in Doomsday Clock that Martin Stein is this really sinister, manipulative figure who who's been playing with Ronnie and manipulating Ronnie all these years. That's an amazing premise, and nobody's done anything with it. Like, what's that all about?
It's right there.
Yeah, it's
It's right there.
crazy.
Um,
But hey, at least we had Barry Allen and Bruce Wayne talking about a badge for 4 issues, you know?
I will say a little bit of an Easter egg here. The ships as they go to Mars,
Mhm.
the Charlton characters share a ship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
They kind of loosely tie them together, very loosely in these little groups, don't they? And
Yeah.
that bit where they're all going to Mars, I love that bit. It's so cool. You know? Because you've got all the DC heroes together, even a couple of surprises. Like on one ship, I think you just showed him, Alpha Centurion is
Yeah.
on one ship. This
Mhm.
really obscure but really cool 90s Superman supporting character is there. It's like,
Mhm.
great. Bloody Dial H for Hero is on another ship as
Is that
Starfish
Flex
Man.
Mentalo?
Flex
Yes, it is.
Mentalo is on the
Yes,
Doom
it is.
Patrol ship. Like, you know.
Mhm.
And yeah, you've got Dial H for Hero as like Starfish Man or whatever he's supposed to be in that form. Like, you know. So again, it's hinting at like, look how cool the DC universe is. Look at these cool little background characters, you know. But yeah, God knows if we'll ever see them again. Like, you
Yeah.
know.
We won't.
No.
I will say one thing about Gary Frank's art. Very early on, issue 1. It's the one where Adrian is very clearly faking having cancer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, my cancer.
Right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, he's-
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I wouldn't buy that for a dime. You know what I mean? Like it's very clear that he's just like, just to be able to think of something like that and to execute it that way. They're like, yeah, when you draw this panel, draw it like he's having a cancer bout, but he's faking it. People that have cancer don't act that way.
No,
Yeah.
they
That's
don't.
not what they do. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
and his cancer is supposed to be like, isn't it supposed to be like terminal at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's like, come on, dude. come on, man. We not.
And Rorschach falls for it because he doesn't know,
He
right?
doesn't know.
Yeah.
Right.
to be fair, like, yeah, Rorschach is set up as being really naive in this, like basically a kid. Like, you
He is
know,
a kid, yeah.
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 Mhm.
Where he has
I
no
think
life
he's
experience. He's a little, he's a little crazy, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
He's like the opposite of the original, because the original was like super cynical, didn't trust anybody and things like that. But he's, like you said, he's more naive, and he's more apt to kind of believe the things he sees and stuff like that, even though the original was writing down all this stuff and was like, listen, I don't trust nothing. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So I mean, that was an interesting bit, though, I thought.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I think like the new characters that Geoff has come up with for this book, so the new Rorschach, Mime and Marionette, they're great characters. Other than the fact that it's a version of Rorschach, do they need to be Watchmen characters? Not really.
No, Mime and Marionette are left behind on DC Earth.
Yeah,
so that DC can continue to use them.
yeah, and they're great characters, so that's fine. But yeah, I don't think we needed to go into the Watchmen universe to do this.
Do we know for a fact that Rorschach went back to the Watchmen universe?
I can't remember if he went back now.
Let me see that.
I think he did, because wasn't the idea that he's going to be like turning Rorschach into something else, something better.
Oh yeah, he went to Mothman's grave.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mothman's a great character in this as well, which is not something I expected myself to be saying. I really love that story. It's like because all the kind of background material that they've put at the end of each issue.
Yeah,
it's just there to be like Watchmen most of the time. It doesn't really add that much to it. But Mothman's letters to his sister, I think, these unanswered letters, they're really sad and really poignant, and I think that they do add to it a little bit. I think
I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that completely. The part where he's asked, she responded to him, and then after that she stopped responding to him again. That was really sad.
Yeah. And I think Geoff Johnston did a lot with that character, which is odd, but good, odd in a good way. Of all the characters to pick from Watchmen to expand on, Mothman, but yeah, it works, Absolutely.
I liked it. I liked that one. One of the other things that they did that was more in there to be like Watchmen, but it doesn't really go anywhere, was all the Nathaniel Dusk stuff.
Yeah.
Which, frankly, on its own, really well done. It actually made me interested in the original Nathaniel Dusk comics with Gene Colan on art. I would like if you told me Gary Frank was going to be doing a Nathaniel Dusk series, I would get it. But unlike the Pirate comic, which very clearly paralleled what was going on in Watchmen, unless I'm an idiot and don't see it, I don't see the relevance of these vignettes.
No. I mean, I love the actor's story. I love Dr. Manhattan choosing to impact this one guy's life in this really small way, and choosing to become a man of action in that sense, just saving one guy. I think that's really lovely. But yeah, I don't know why we're watching this film all the way through it.
Yeah, that's my issue with it.
Absolutely, yeah. So we've talked a little bit about aspects of the Watchmen universe done well and done not so well. Before we move on, are there any other sort of aspects of specific characters in the Watchmen side of things that are done well or not so well, do you think? Duy or LaMar?
Dr. Manhattan kicks Captain Adam's ass, which is good because Captain Adam sucks.
What low hanging fruit? Accurate but low hanging fruit.
There.
Also, how great is that bit where Guy Gardner just punches Dr. Manhattan and breaks his neck and is like, oh, wow, we did it. I just love that.
Yeah, if anybody's going to execute that, it had to have been him. It couldn't have been
Yeah.
anybody else.
Yeah.
You know, it just wouldn't have been believable coming from anybody except for the guy who thinks that he can save the universe with one punch, right?
Yeah.
And he probably had some sort of like, you know, psychosis or something with the whole one punch thing, I think, at this point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that was a good bit though. Yeah.
The whole fight on Mars is great. I love it.
Yeah.
You know, the whole confrontation is
Oh, it
fantastic.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely great.
It's kind of like, purely from a fanboy point of view, it's what you'd want to see from the DC heroes versus Dr. Manhattan, isn't it? Like,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Geoff Johns has always been good with fights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He's always been good with fight scenes.
Yeah.
I mean, the other big moment, thinking of fight scenes, is Better Late Than Never. That double page spread is my my desktop wallpaper in work. I just love it so much. The Legion and the Justice Society and Superman.
Now
it's so
imagine
great.
how that would have felt if it had come out on time.
Well, exactly. I try not to think about that. How last minute do you think Gary Frank had to leave it to get the exact right designs for the Legion? Like, you know, 'cause-
Right. I was going to ask about that because that's what the Legion looks like now, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
And Ryan Sook has only just done those designs pretty much. Like, at that point anyway, like, so
I have no idea.
so you must have just had these stick men just waiting to get the designs from Ryan Sook. Like,
Probably
Must
so.
have been,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah.
Wow.
So when the continuity changed, who remembers what? Like, did Ozymandias remember everything? Or is he just now remembering what the new continuity Ozymandias would know?
Funny enough, in regards to the DC universe, the status quo now in the DC universe is that all the characters, even down to normal people on the street, know there's been reboots, and that's kind of part of Infinite Frontier is kind of dealing with that. But that's not just unfolded in Doomsday Clock. That's kind of spinning out of other stuff too.
Well, we'll go with that explanation then.
Yeah. So that's really cool, though. You know, I like that aspect. Like, you know.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot easier to deal with than trying to add all of this other story stuff on top of stuff. It's kind of like Paulie, do you guys have like Golden Corral where you live?
No,
y'all don't have that. Okay, that's probably just like a US thing. Basically, it's just like it's a cheap buffet, right? But it's like a cafeteria style type thing. So you just kind of walk around and you get this here, and then they have like an Italian station if you want spaghetti or pizza, and then you go here and they have like the southern food, and then you have the fried chicken, the steaks, and all of that as you work your way around. But it's really, really cheap, and the quality of the food is not really all that great. But if you have big groups of people, it's a good place to go because they have a lot of sitting space. So it's kind of like people will just go and they'll just pile things just on their plates like this, you know, and it's just kind of what you do. So it's not like you're eating like one meal. It's like you're eating like 4 meals at once. So on one part of your plate, you're going to have the spaghetti. Then you go over here, you're going to have the mashed potatoes. Then you're going to go over here and you're going to have hamburger. Then you're going to go over here and then you're like, oh, I want a slice of pie. And then you put that on there. So you have this plate that's stacked high with all of this stuff that doesn't go together, right? So what the point I was making is that sometimes DC has a habit of doing that with continuity. They literally walk the Golden Corral line and they just pile things on to try to make things make sense. And it doesn't work because it ends up creating problems later. So it's just like, you could either do that or you could just say, yeah, everybody knows we're doing this stuff. Even the people in the stories, they know we're doing this stuff. That makes a lot more sense, right?
I mean, as a metaphor generally for the DC universe, that really works, I think, because ever since the start, it's been like, yeah, we've got a bit of DC, bit of quality comics, bit of Fawcett comics, you know, bit of this, bit of that, you know, just jammed together, like, you know. Yeah.
Different bits and pieces of DC too.
Yeah.
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 So something I'd like to ask, and I'm actually going to get the second volume out here. When it ends, we see a lot of possible future reboots that Geoff Johns kind of tosses off. And I was wondering if any of them kind of stood out to you as something
I'll
you'd
tell
like to
you
have.
what stands out to me, Paul.
Yeah?
I'll tell you what stands out to me. It is April 18th, 2038. Okay. The next one is the year 2045. That's 7 years, Geoff. You're not even giving us 7 years for a straight continuity. You're basically saying you're going to reboot in 7 years. What the hell?
Yeah, but you know, we got another 20 odd years before we have to worry about it.
It's the year 2020. Superman's timeline is bombarded by the reckless energies of the old gods, once again warping the metaverse. It's July 2nd, 2025. It's January 2026.
Like, we're gonna take all of these ideas and do what we do. We're just gonna do it at light speed, and we're gonna write ourselves into a corner and create all of these narrative problems in 12 months flat. Now let's see if we can beat the record. You know what I mean?
I also like how he predicts Earth 5G happening, and that pretty much got blown out of the water the
Yeah, it's
second
gone
this
now.
came out. Like,
Yeah, that's over. Yeah.
That's gone now with Didio out.
Yeah,
Mhm.
probably for the best, you know.
I will have no comment.
Yeah.
You know,
I will.
What do you think of... Oh God, sorry.
I will not comment on that.
Fair enough. What do you think of the idea of the Kents find the rocket with their 3-year-old daughter Clara in the year 2162? 2162. What do you think the idea of Superman having a little sister? That's quite nice.
162.
And 2162.
Yeah. They should probably do that a bit sooner. That sounds quite cool.
There in the other 2038. There's two 2038s. One of them is Jonathan, Martha, and their baby Colin. Will find.
Oh wow!
Will be Superman.
So you've got a little brother as well. I prefer the idea of a little sister. I think, although it is another development that makes Lana Lang even more pointless as a character.
She's not even in this book. Like at all. Yeah, I like the idea of Superman having a sibling. I like it.
Yeah.
I think it would be funnier if Kara landed first.
Oh,
I see. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
That'd be good. Yeah.
Yeah, not both of them. By the way, have you realized that they've never done a story where Superman was picked up by Jimmy Olsen's parents? I'm kidding. I don't want to see that either.
Nobody does. Nobody does. Yeah, I don't think even Jimmy Olsen wants to see that.
What if Superman was Jimmy Olsen?
I could have gone with Lois Lane's parents, but no.
Yeah.
So tell me, guys, what do you think of this? On July 10th, 2030, the Secret Crisis begins, throwing Superman into a brawl across the universe with Thor himself and a green behemoth stronger than even Doomsday, who dies protecting Superman from these invaders.
I'd read that.
Yeah.
I think that is being very optimistic about what Disney's going to be allowing Marvel to do.
Right.
in the next 10 years. But okay, Geoff.
I'm pretty sure he probably has written a pitch for that already. That's probably why it's in that book.
Probably.
Would you want Geoff Johns and Gary Frank to do a big JLA Avengers crossover? Because I would. Definitely. Yeah.
I mean, Geoff Johns, if I get Gary Frank art out of it, they could do a Rainbow Bright Strawberry Shortcake crossover, and I would be there for it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not even gonna lie to you. So yeah, of course I'm gonna say yeah to that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, honestly, at this point, I would be happy for any crossover.
Yeah.
For any DC Marvel crossover, I miss them.
Mhm.
I do like how this is Geoff Johns JSA.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And fair play to him, because it's a good lineup, you know? It's yeah.
It is, yeah. It's a great lineup.
Yeah.
And I love that it's them. And even bringing Dr. Fate back to life, because as far as I know, he died in Geoff Johns' JSA.
There's a new Dr. Fate now.
Who is it?
Some guy called Khalid. I don't know much about him, but he seems pretty cool. He turned up in Flash this week.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah, he was I think he was the last Dr. Fate before the reboot.
Right.
And
Really?
yeah. And then they sidelined him after all of that stuff happened, but apparently they brought him back.
That's good.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I like Dr. Fate. Oh yeah, what do you guys think of Johnny Thunder in all this? I very much enjoyed him in it.
I love him.
Yeah.
I mean, what's not to love, man? I mean, he runs around in a suit and he has an ink pen and a genie comes out of it. I mean,
I also they got me. I also completely forgot that he had turned into the Thunderbolt.
Yeah.
They got me on that one. It's like, oh yeah, you became the Thunderbolt, remember?
Yeah.
I assume
that's a lovely moment, that is.
I assume the guy talking to him is Jakeem, right? That would have to be Jakeem.
Yeah.
Say you, yeah. That's great.
So
it is weird to me that Alan Scott is, in the absence of Superman in that era, Alan Scott is the main superhero. That's a little weird. It makes sense, but it's a little weird to me.
I do like it though. I think it works because he's always been this kind of elder statesman, him and Jay Garrick.
But right. If you say it's him and Jay Garrick, that makes more sense to me. But that Alan Scott is revered as the leader of the JSA is like that. I don't know. My brain automatically pairs Green Lanterns and Flashes together is the thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, you were saying, Paul, you wanted to bring something up.
Oh, just a really tiny little detail. I can't decide whether this is amazing or terrible. So, on this page where it's glimpsing a possible future, Superman, a crisis unlike any the metaverse has seen, one they call Time Masters, erupts. But in its wake, Superman is revitalized and his greatest allies return. So in the corner, you've got Flash, Barry Allen, you've got Wally running next to him, and you've got what seems to be Wally's kids. And you can just kind of see Iris West's, his daughter Iris West's kind of leg. And then you can see someone, I assume, to be his son, Jay West, dressed as a giant turtle.
As the Turtle Man.
What's that all about?
As the new Turtle Man.
Is that terrible or is it good? I can't decide.
The answer to that is yes.
The answer to that is yes. You know what is actually terrible? That Wally West costume.
Yeah, well, they've got rid of that, thankfully. That's something Geoff failed to predict. Wally's got his costume from Flash Rebirth back now, which is a pretty good costume, I think.
That's good, because I hate that Kid Flash mask on the Flash suit. I hate it.
Yeah, it's not good.
No, it's ugly looking. Yeah, what a great page, though. I like how Donna is running.
Yeah.
You can fly, girl.
Yeah. She wants to look at Nightwing's butt.
I don't think she sees him that way.
No, no.
Unlike everyone else. Hey, you know what I realized? Kyle is not in this picture.
Yeah, it's weird that, isn't it?
Kyle is not in this book. I just realized that.
Yeah, he's not, is he? He's not in it at all.
No, what's up with that?
I always find it a bit weird, like Kyle getting left out of stuff, like the way Alex Ross refuses to draw Kyle, but he'll draw up practically anybody else, you know, any other flash in the pan superhero from DC and Marvel, Alex Ross will draw, but not Kyle.
Not Kyle
It's
Rayner.
very
Like, what's
bizarre.
up with that?
I wonder if this is a similar thing. I can't imagine it is.
No,
I mean-
because I think Geoff likes Kyle.
Yeah, yeah. Both Geoff Johns and Gary Frank have drawn Kyle, I'm sure. Yeah. So very peculiar. What do you think about the idea of Superman will keep rebooting until he catches up with the Legion? I really like that idea.
I don't get it. Like, I get the whole keep rebooting thing, but like, what does that mean? When he gets to the 31st century, does that mean that what does that mean for the Legion?
Well, I think like the Legion, the world of the Legion is supposed to represent the promise of Superman, isn't it? This sort of utopia. And Superman will keep rebooting until he achieves that utopia, I guess, is where he's going with it. Like,
Yeah, that's how I read it too.
yeah.
So
I quite like that idea.
does that mean that Superman's last reboot will be as Superboy who joins the Legion?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Another weird absence from this is John Kent, Superman's son. It's weird how I think he might get a mention once in one panel. I'm not sure.
Yeah, he gets mentioned in one panel. Is it too late
Yeah.
to change John's godfather?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very odd, isn't it, that like Geoff has decided not to make a place for John Kent in this, because even when this was being written, John was already shaping up to be a really big character.
Maybe he knew that they were putting him in space.
Maybe. Yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
Who knows?
Maybe it
One
was one of those
interesting-
things where Bendis was like, I got things to do with John Kent. And Geoff is
I'm
like,
going to stick him in a volcano for 7 years.
and Geoff is like, all right, well, you go do that.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
one
sometimes it's
interest-
better to stay out of other folks' business. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's one
Yeah.
interesting thing here. It is June 17th, 2026. Superman goes on a quest to find Bruce Wayne's lost daughter so she can save Bruce's son.
I like
And
this.
I wonder, because I know Dan Didio's plan for Damian was for him to be evil, to basically be the new Ra's al Ghul.
Okay, I do not
Nah.
like this.
No, it's rubbish, yeah. And then, so he would be John Kent's arch enemy, and John Kent would be Superman, and like Damian would be this Ra's al Ghul figure, and they would be former friends who are now enemies. And I wonder if it was an allusion to that thing that thankfully never happened.
Yeah.
It could be, but who would the daughter have been with?
Yeah, yeah.
Silver St.
But
Cloud.
that's intriguing. Oh, mind you, you say that. Isn't there I've stopped reading it because it was a bit confusing, but I think Batman's daughter turns up in Batman Catwoman by Tom King.
What?
So I wonder if it was her. Because they jump to the future in that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe
That's
so.
one of the reasons I
Yeah.
stopped reading it, because it was jumping between the past, the present, and the future. And I just got to the point where, like, yeah, I'm sure this is very good, but I can't be bothered with it. Like, yeah.
There's just too much going on right now.
Yeah. So I wonder, maybe it was tying into that.
It's
So yeah,
possible.
we've
I
got
can
a
see
little
it.
glimpse of 5G potentially here, what it could have been.
I'm glad that didn't happen with Damien, though. That would have just been, LaMar was talking about how some ideas shouldn't be done because they're stupid. That is a stupid idea.
It is a stupid idea.
Yeah. I think Damien as a character has kind of evolved past that kind of stuff, you know. So that's one of those ideas. If you're going to do that, you do it earlier, you don't do it at all. I mean,
Yeah.
it's still not a very good idea no matter when you do it. But I think at this point, that kind of stuff is just it's a step backwards, you know.
Because Damien's one of those characters who just took off, like just became popular. I believe even beyond anyone's intention.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, they killed him, and then they had no choice but to bring him back because he was that popular. So
Yeah.
you don't do that.
And also, we've got Ra's al Ghul.
Yeah. We don't really need another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also true.
So, I don't know. To sum up, then.
Wait, I have a question.
Oh,
whatever you think of the mime and marionette?
Oh yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about them. Yeah, that's a really good question. I really like them, but like I said earlier on, they could be DC characters. They could be a reboot of Punch and Julie.
Yeah.
Bit of background for people watching this: all the Watchmen characters are riffs on Charlton characters. So Night Owl is Blue Beetle, Dr. Manhattan is Captain Atom, Rorschach is the Question, and so on. And so the only kind of Charlton characters that didn't get riffed on in Watchmen were Punch and Julie. So
And the Judo Master.
And Judo Master, yeah. Do we see? No.
No, we
Jeff's
never.
not interested in that.
I don't know why. No one has ever tried. I don't know why. No Judo Master.
But I think Geoff bought Judo Master into JSA. So.
Oh really? Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so Punch and Julie get revamped or riffed on as Mime and Marionette, and they're really good characters. I think I really like their backstory. I really like how vicious they are. That cheese wire thing she does is brutal.
Yeah.
But it's good. But yeah, I don't know if they need to be Watchmen characters. They don't add anything to the Watchmen universe.
And at the end of it, they are not Watchmen characters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what do you think, LaMar?
Well, the first thing I'm going to say, and remember I told y'all, do not let me forget to say this. In the Batman scene where there's the big fight with the Rogues Gallery and all of that, right? And the Riddler shows up, but it's not just any Riddler. It's Frank Gorshin from Batman 66. There is no way I was not going to do this show and not mention that. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So, and there was no question about it. People be like, how you know? Look him up on the internet and then look at the picture. That's how we know, right? It wasn't ambiguous at all. Like, they wanted to make it clear that that's exactly who it was. And I have no problem with that at all.
Yeah.
And also, they had been promising, I think since Rebirth, because people were just like, hey, where's the JSA? And then, they were like, we're going to bring them back. And so then when the Rebirth thing happened and they were showing them in the midst of everything. And then they were like, no, they're coming back. And it's not like variations of them from other worlds or whatever. These are the real people. And then they never showed up. And then all of a sudden there's like there's an issue where the whole issue is dedicated to like bringing them back. Like that was so awesome. Just seeing Gary Frank draw the JSA.
Yeah.
For those of y'all who don't know, I'm the resident JSA nut around here. So just seeing that, I just was, you know what I mean? So there was a lot of payoff for people like me who, were just like, hey, some of these new 52 people and stuff like that, they just didn't do it for me, And so just to be like, yeah, it's just some stuff we just need to have on deck. Right. And for them to just do that and bring the JSA back the way they did. And those pages are beautiful, man. I want to try to see if I could purchase them, some of them, or at least one of them if they're for sale. You know what I mean? Just to have in the house. But yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I that whole issue where you see like them waiting around for Superman to turn up and then them saying, "Oh, no one else is going to turn up, so let's get started."
I liked the mime and marionette. I have always said before, people are scared of clowns. I'm scared of mimes. So
Understood.
this was a good way to fill that gap for me. I've always thought there should be a villain that was a mime because I don't want to be in your box, man.
Yeah.
Have you seen a mime before, like in real life?
Yeah, they're creepy. Look at them.
Yeah. I saw one when I went to when I went to New York this past summer. I was there for 3 days and I saw one on the street. I didn't know he was a mime because he was dressed like a he was just dressed normally, and then he started doing the box thing, and I'm like, and I'm thinking this is just some crazy New Yorker, right? Because I've never been to New York before. You know what I mean? So I was like, dang, man, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, let me get on back to the B&B where I'm staying at, man. I'm out, going to Central Park or something, man, because I can't deal with this,
Stop being mimes, people.
I love how they've both got that villain thing, though, that thing that really good villains have, where they turn up and they're like, these are horrible, irredeemable people. I hate them. And then you see them when they were kids and they're like, oh, yeah, I don't like them, but they're really sympathetic now. And I don't understand why they're murderers, obviously, because I'm not a psychopath, but I'm interested in them. Yeah, I'm interested in what makes them tick. That backstory was really good.
I feel bad about what happened for you. You're wrong about everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but it's a good story, it's a really good backstory to him.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it makes you wonder if you could have just done that with Punch and Julie, though.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know much about Punch and Julie, so maybe you couldn't. Maybe there's a big reason.
No, yes, you could, because you know what? You know why? Who has ever read Punch and Julie?
Yeah.
There's my argument right there.
And another tiny thing about it as well. There's a scene quite early on where you see a comedy club in Gotham City, and British comedian Stuart Lee is doing a stand-up set there and getting bottles thrown at him. And it just seems really odd of all the British comedians Gary Frank could have drawn into that. He's chosen the one who's really good mates with Alan Moore.
Oh,
it's very strange. I don't know why he's done that. Maybe he's mates with him as well, to be fair.
It's possibly not a coincidence.
I mean, it would make sense if Gary Frank and Stuart Lee were friends as well, because I know Stuart Lee's a big Hulk fan, and Gary Frank's a really famous Hulk artist. So
yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, maybe so.
But yeah, who knows? It did seem very weird though to have him there. And also, he's a much better comedian than that scene would imply.
That's probably part of the joke. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Not in this universe.
So I think to sum up, I mean, certainly my perspective here is Doomsday Clock. Great DC comic, great Superman story, rubbish Watchmen sequel. But I think, well, we can't even say every Watchmen sequel was going to be rubbish because this TV series everyone thinks is great, so except presumably Alan Moore. So there's a better Watchmen sequel out there basically, but as a Superman comic, it's second, and well, it's very good, very, very good. So what do you guys think in summary then? LaMar, how would you sum it up?
Oh, wait a minute. Before we sum it up, we got to talk about the end with the clash. We got to talk about that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Let's do that. Definitely.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Superman versus Dr. Manhattan. That had been the talk. The entire time that they were leading up to the story, is people were like, "Oh man, Superman can't beat Dr. Manhattan because Dr. Manhattan can just think and Superman's gone, or and then people were like, well, that's kind of what Superman does. He rises to the challenge and he lays waste to everybody.
That's a penis.
Yeah. Dewey also highlights as a biology teacher with human anatomy, right? so we've got this kind of thing going on, but it's interesting though, because I was obviously thinking these two are not going to fight, like physically. That's not going to be the fight, obviously. And that's pretty much what we ended up getting. And I think that's why Dr. Manhattan, he couldn't see what happened after Superman threw the punch. And so I think that was an interesting story bit, because what you ultimately end up with, and I'm going to keep this brief because I want to hear what you guys got to say about it. But what you ultimately have is the way things, Dr. Manhattan represents how a lot of comic fans think they want things to be, but Superman represents like how things need to be, right? And so you have these two characters facing off, and it's like, okay, what's the standard? You know what I mean? So it's like, is Dr. Manhattan the standard, or is Superman still the standard after almost 100 years? So you find out which one it is in the story, and the way they did it, I thought was fantastic. Because there was it wasn't cliched, right? Mm-hmm. So even though I kind of knew what was going to happen, I didn't know how they were going to do it. And so even when I can see something coming, so to speak, if I don't know how it's going to happen, I'm still there for it. So like, yeah, so that's what I would say. Yeah.
I agree. I think it's really beautiful that in this story, Dr. Manhattan is representing cynicism, and that's not necessarily an authentic representation of that character as Alan Moore intended, but right. Mm-hmm. For the purposes of this story, he's cynicism, like you say, he's what some comic fans think they want comics to be like. That's what Dr. Manhattan is, and all the way through, he's working on the assumption that Superman's going to beat him up or kill him or something, mm-hmm. and it doesn't occur to him for a second that he might be seeing Superman saving him. Mm-hmm. Which is what it is. That is what he's seeing. He's seeing Superman punching. Is it Black Adam, I think, or someone like that, coming up behind him or something?
It was the Russian firestorm.
There we go. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
yeah. So Superman saving him, and it doesn't occur to Dr. Manhattan for a second that that's what it could be, and I think that's rather wonderful. Mm-hmm. As a Superman fan, I really like that. What do you think, Duy?
I think the beautiful thing about that is that John can't see, so he sees all of these things that happen in the future and the past and all the flow of time, but he doesn't see this one because Superman changes it.
Yeah.
And not only that, right after that, he forces John to make a choice, which, as we've said, John does not make choices. John lives out his life as like the way that he believes he's destined to live out his life, and here he is, mm-hmm. like Superman's like, you got to make a choice. So props to Geoff Johns for not using that whole the whole line of the only thing necessary for evil to succeed is for good men to do nothing, which I kind of thought he was going to go with. because so much of this story has been a sledgehammer.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that he did not use that is good restraint there, Geoff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you guys think about Clark, son of Dr. Manhattan? Are you interested in seeing more of this character? Because I gotta be honest, I'm not. Nah.
I mean, like, if he shows up in something and it's cool, I'm with it. But because there's a lot of potential for that. But usually when you have a lot of potential with something like that, there's a lot of potential for it to go wrong. You know what I mean? So I'd rather not even bother. Right? You see what I'm saying? So, if it pops, if he does something fly, I'm with it. But otherwise, not really.
And of all the things that could spin out of Doomsday Clock, sister of Superman, Firestorm and the Dick version of Martin Stein. That's already
Mhm.
interesting.
Mhm.
This isn't, I don't think.
This is
Clark,
at
son
the
of
bottom of the
Dr.
list, and I think it's also implied that Clark, son of Dr. Manhattan, might show up in the DC universe and eventually run into Mime and Marionette, his actual parents.
Mm.
I'm like, I don't need to see another Clark.
Yeah.
Why is that there? I can do without it.
As an ending, it works though. I like it as an
Mhm.
ending to that
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, it is nice to see Laurie and Dan
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
in this Watchmen spinoff. Do you realize that's like 2 Watchmen sequels where Dan Dryberg doesn't even show up?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, at least he's not replaced by a blue dildo in this one.
Agreed.
Yeah. um. Yeah. So there's one more thing I wanted to mention about it. Oh, that's right. I think it's worth a mention because it's so stupid in a sort of. It's kind of almost offensive, but in a sort of wonderfully stupid way. Have either of you guys read Death Metal?
I've read some of it, yeah, but not.
Yeah,
I've
so
never read it.
there's a bit in that because there's all these evil Batmen knocking around, and one of them's the Batman who laughs. And at one point, he gives himself the power of Dr. Manhattan and becomes Batman Hatton. So I kind of love that they did that.
I gotta look that up. The thing that I don't like was when Wally supposed to be Dr. Manhattan at one point?
Yeah, for some
Yeah.
reason. I don't know
Okay,
why.
I just googled Bat Manhattan and this looks terrible.
Yeah.
Thinking of Wally as Dr. Manhattan, there's a panel in Death Metal that obviously got written after Dan Didio got sacked. And it's Barry fighting Dr. Manhattan version of Wally. And Barry saying, "You're not Wally, you're just a bad idea."
Ah,
Yeah. One thing I want to say before we close out is at the end where everybody's kind of like reminiscing on what just happened or whatever. And then, Lex Luthor is like, he's talking about Ozymandias, and he's like, yeah, that was a pretty good idea, but you could have made it, there's a couple places where you messed up, and I know how to make it better, So I think that's another thing where it'd be nice to see where that goes. But then there's also another bit where Lois is talking to Clark, and they're out on the street, and she's talking to him about, how, he managed to change Dr. Manhattan, and he changed him for the better. And it's like, hey, that's kind of what you do. You change people for the better, even a guy like him. And so then, his parents come around the corner, right? And so there's a panel in between when he sees his parents, and he's just kind of, Superman just kind of looking, and and he's like, because Lois was like, yeah, you changed him, he's going to change somebody else. And so one of the people he changed is Clark, because he altered the timeline so that he gets his father back. You see what I'm saying? So I just thought that was a nice touch too, to round the story off, towards the end, because obviously, if you want to know whether he really changed him or not, there's your evidence, so yeah, I just thought that was dope.
Yeah, that is pretty great. So yeah, before I sum it up, then anything else we haven't covered?
all I'll say is that I shelf this incredibly Watchmen looking produced book with a Watchmen type font and logo and everything, with the initials DC. And I shelve it in my Superman stuff. So
Yeah, see,
You don't put it next to Watchmen, do you?
I don't.
It next
I
to
do
your
not put
Superman.
it next to Watchmen. I put it right next to my Superman stuff.
Yeah, same. I've got it next to Final Crisis, Legion of Three Worlds, and Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. You know, so it's yeah,
I've
nowhere
got.
near Watchmen.
I've got it right next to Infinite Crisis, the other Geoff Johns work that has the rewriting of the multiverse with Superman at the center of it. Done.
He
14
likes
years
that
apart. Clearly, I'm a sucker
LaMar.
for this. So.
Yeah. LaMar, anything to add before we sum up?
Nah, not really. Just to say that, I know we've, I don't want anybody to come away from this video thinking that, we that we're ragging on this story, because that's not what's happening here. It's just that there were a lot of things that happened to bring this story about. And in Geoff Johns fashion, because he does this with a lot of stories, he did it with Blackest Night and Brightest Day, right? Because a lot of his stuff, they call them Geoff Cons, right? So, because he's really good at that. So there was some Geoff Conning going on in this story. And so a lot of times he frames these events around things that, basically fixing other people's mistakes. But in this story, while he was able to do that and he was able to make a lot of things, right again, when we're pointing out, the flaws that the story has, I don't necessarily think it's a reflection of the creative team. It's just a reflection of what they had to deal with. So you can kind of look at it like a actor who does a really good job in a role, but the script is not all that great, so they don't have a lot to work with. That's kind of what was happening here. So we were just kind of pointing out those things and not necessarily trashing the story. So, because we know that kind of stuff is coming. So I'm just jumping ahead of it, so to speak. And so, no, we're not ragging the story because we hate it, obviously. I mean, we've all bought it and purchased it, right? So, so no, it's not that. It's a great story. It's a great Superman story. So, so I don't want anybody to get confused. That's all I wanted to say, just to clear that up, in case there was somebody who's like a string hanging or something, and they thought that we were this is a trash fest for Doomsday Clock, because that's not what this is.
Okay,
No,
well, I will say that I
agree.
agree with you that most of the drawbacks in the story are not their fault. The delays are, though.
You got me on that one.
But you're right. I mean, like, we've been joking about a lot of the flaws. I mean, I think, the kind of things we were joking about is, if you talk about DC and Marvel, these are the kind of jokes and flaws that you're going to have, like, because that's the nature of the beast. And I'm okay with it because I love the whole thing. I the whole kind of package of DC and Marvel mainstream superhero comics, warts and all. I love it. And this kind of like has those same warts as well. But that's okay because I love those warts. And I like joking about them as well, and yeah, at the heart of this is just a great Superman story that looks amazing. I've read it several times since it came out. I own the original comics and I own the hardbacks as well. I just absolutely adore this story, warts and all.
I mean, let me put it this way: we say that these Watchmen characters are out of character. They wouldn't be acting like that, all of that stuff. Neither would Superman in Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah,
well, this is
absolutely
it.
Great point. Yeah, Frank Miller
Yeah.
has said as much. Yeah.
And the thing is, like, Doomsday Clock doesn't make Watchmen go away,
Yeah.
It doesn't undermine Watchmen in any way, because Watchmen is still there. It's still fantastic, and it's still saying all these great things,
Yeah.
So I think if you take it as like a Superman story, it's great. It's fantastic.
Yeah. 20 years from now, we'll still be talking about Watchmen. And to the extent that we'll be talking about Doomsday Clock, it'll be as a Superman story.
Yeah, and I certainly think I'll still be revisiting Doomsday Clock in 20 years. Not in the same way I revisit Watchmen, you know,
Mhm.
in a
Well,
sort of like, this is fun.
You know, Paul, according to Geoff Johns in this story, we will have rebooted Superman 4 more times since then.
Well, there we go. Yeah. Yeah. That is true. So yeah, basically, if you love DC Comics, get over yourself and read Doomsday Clock because it's a lot of fun. Is my message to you, my friends. And I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. Click like and subscribe.
And share. And leave a comment. Tell us how wrong we are. No, I don't.